Hi everyone, welcome back to Clues by Sam, but this is not the usual daily walkthrough. In Clues by Sam, there's a newsletter you can subscribe to, and every now and then you get bonus puzzles with varying difficulties. What we are having right now here is the evil difficulty puzzle from the latest newsletter, and I got requested by Sam himself to make a video out of it, so here we are. If you want to solve along, you can use the link in the description. Before I continue, I must warn you, this puzzle is extremely difficult. I think this might be the hardest puzzle we've come across thus far. Alright, that's enough intro, let's get started. There's an odd number of criminals to the left of Kevin. Since we know there are 3 criminals in row 3, we can mark Lisa as a criminal. 2 pilots have an innocent directly below them, so there are 2 innocents among these 3. Since we know from Kevin's clue that either Isaac or Joyce is innocent, we can mark Ellie as innocent. Kevin has the most innocent neighbors. Here we go, our first major roadblock. Where do we even start? Kevin must have more innocent neighbors than everyone else, but we have barely opened anything yet. But there's a way around. When you compare neighbors between 2 people, we can ignore the shared neighbors and only consider the remaining. For example, if you compare Joyce against Kevin, we can ignore these 4 shared neighbors and only compare the remaining 8 people. If Isaac was innocent and Joyce was a criminal, then Kevin and Joyce have the same number of innocent neighbors in this area. So for Kevin to have more innocent neighbors than Joyce, there must be more innocents in this area than in this area. But as you can see, the best he can do is tie, so our assumption turned out to be wrong. Mark Isaac as a criminal and Joyce as innocent. There are 12 criminals in total. Since there are 20 people in the board, this also means there are 8 innocents in total. I'll put this up here so that we don't forget. From here on, you will see me use the corner marker feature. Basically, I'm setting up various different situations until I run into a contradiction, so that I can rule them out. But to save ourselves time, I will only show you what I eventually landed on. Sarah and Zoe have an equal number of innocent neighbors. First of all, we can rule out Sarah and Zoe having 3 innocent neighbors, because then everyone else would be criminals, and Paul would have more innocent neighbors than Kevin. Now let's assume Olive is a criminal. Zoe could have 1 or 2 criminal neighbors. If Zoe had 2 criminal neighbors, then Paul and Rose would be criminals. Remember that Kevin has only 1 more innocent neighbor than Joyce within this area. So the right side area must have at least the same number of innocents as the left side area. So Nick must be a criminal, and Henry must be innocent. And Will must be innocent also. Now you can see that Kevin, Olive, and Paul all have 4 criminal neighbors. Kevin has to have less criminals than everyone else, so Sarah and Zoe must be criminals, and Flora and Gary must be innocent. We have 7 innocents here, so there should be 1 more innocent in row 1. But no matter where we place it, there will always be another person with the same number of innocent neighbors as Kevin. So we've gone through all of this only to realize that Zoe cannot have 2 criminal neighbors. Therefore, Nick and Will must be innocent. And again, the right side of Kevin must have at least the same number of innocents as the left side of Joyce. So Henry and Rose become innocent, and Paul would be a criminal. But if you look here, Kevin and Paul have the same number of innocent neighbors in this area, and there are 2 innocents below Paul. So there must be 3 innocents above Kevin. But now there are 9 innocent neighbors, so Zoe cannot have 1 criminal neighbor either. So what's the conclusion? Our initial assumption was wrong, and Olive must be innocent. Next, let's assume Henry is a criminal. Then Rose must be innocent, and Nick must be a criminal. And since we've established that Zoe cannot have 3 innocent neighbors, Paul must be a criminal, and consequently, Will must be innocent. But now we've run into the same issue again. Kevin and Paul have the same number of innocents in this area, and we can't have more innocents in the upper area than the lower area. Meaning, Kevin cannot have more innocent neighbors than Paul. So we can conclude that Henry must be innocent. Now it's worth noting that Nick and Rose must be either both innocent or both criminals, and the same should apply for Paul and Will. Next, take a look at Henry's clue. There's an odd number of criminal cops. Let's assume Zoe is innocent. Then either Dennis or Sarah must be innocent as well. And with that, there are currently 7 innocents on the board. Since we can only have one more innocent, the pairings we just mentioned would have to be all criminals. So these two and these two. But now if you look at Paul, he has 4 innocent neighbors and Kevin only has 3. And we can only have one more innocent on the board. Therefore, we can go back and mark Zoe as a criminal. There's an odd number of criminals in column C. So column C must have either 1 or 3 criminals. We can rule out the first case, because if Chad, Gary, and Paul are innocent, then Will must become innocent as well. And that makes 9 innocents on the board. Now let's assume Chad is innocent. Then Gary, Paul, and Will would become criminals. Again, Kevin and Paul have the same number of innocent neighbors in this area. So the upper area must have more innocents than the lower area. So Flora must be innocent. There are currently 7 innocents on the board, so all the pairings must be criminals. But now Isaac and Kevin have the same number of innocents, so we run into a contradiction. Therefore, Chad must be a criminal. Next, Paul and Chad have 6 innocent neighbors in total. Let's assume Barb is innocent. Then we have 7 innocents on the board, so these two and these two must be criminals. Now, if Paul was innocent, then so should Will, and everyone else would be a criminal. But now both Kevin and Paul have the same number of innocent neighbors, so this can't be. If Paul was a criminal, then so should Will, and Gary must be innocent. And again, now that we have 7 innocents on the board, all the pairings must be criminals. Since Paul and Chad must have 6 innocent neighbors in total, Flora must be a criminal. But now both Flora and Kevin have the same number of innocent neighbors, so this can't be the case either. Therefore, now we can go back and mark Barb as a criminal. Nick and Dennis have 4 innocent neighbors in total. Let's assume Sarah is innocent. Then Will, Paul, and Gary would have to be all criminals. But this makes 4 criminals in column C, so we can't have it. Mark Sarah and Dennis as criminals. Aaron and Zoe have 3 innocent neighbors in total. Let's assume Paul is innocent. Then Will must become innocent, and Gary must become a criminal. And since there are already 3 innocent neighbors combined for Aaron and Zoe, we can also mark Rose, Nick, and Flora as criminals. But now there are only 5 innocent neighbors combined for Chad and Paul, so this can't be the case. Mark Paul and Will as criminals, and Gary as innocent. We've finally arrived at the last clue. There are more innocent pilots than innocent teachers. There are 6 innocents on the board, and Nick and Rose need to be the same color. So these are the only 2 possible states. Mark Aaron and Flora as innocent, and Nick and Rose as criminals. And there we have it, solved in 25 minutes. What a marathon. My head is spinning. But I also had a lot of fun. Now that's what I call a puzzle. Did you guys survive? Let me know how you did it. Alright, that's going to be it for this special episode. Thank you for watching.